everyone for coming out. I didn't know if there'd be 2 people or 200 people, so we have somewhere in the middle. This is the first of a couple of conversations we're going to have about this. The downfall of some of the implementations that I've seen with any big swings or adjustments with calendars is that there weren't multiple opportunities to have conversations, both internally and externally with parents, community members, teachers, you name it. So this is just one of those attempts. Raise your hand if you are a staff member. Many of you are, right? So we had this conversation, at least an internal conversation, a couple of weeks ago. And so now is the next iteration of that. So thank you for being here. Last year we discussed this in 3 different categories. And there's kind of a 4th category now that I want to discuss, but this is kind of where we started. So the first option was to keep the current calendar, which is kind of a calendar that we adopted this year, which has a modified version to it. We went to the 1,068 hours versus traditional days. Return to a traditional calendar, which is what we had before we adjusted it slightly. And some people are like, how much adjustment did we really make? Well, it wasn't this huge, overwhelmingly different calendar, but it allows us to be more flexible with time, and more on that later. The modified calendar, which some people are calling the year-round calendar, is not an actual year-round calendar. Nashville adopted a version of that. Hot Springs adopted a version of that. Magnolia adopted a version of that. There's some other school districts in the eastern part of the state that adopted a version of that. We had a version of that last year that you all saw and probably even voted on, like 2 different versions of that. We had very limited conversation with our stakeholders on that, how we would respond to a calendar like that with our most vulnerable populations of students who may need those 2.5 square meals a day, etc. And student needs are our number 1 category that we care about. The next piece, the 4th option, if you will, is something that I want you to be aware of. So in the world last year, there was still this, I won't call it crazy because I'm being video recorded, but a law that was led by the legislature, obviously, but really led by the tourism board, which was you couldn't start school before a certain day. Well, with all of the AMI days going away and the way the calendars have adjusted, the year-round adoptions, the 4-day-a-week adoptions, you name it, the legislature passed something where you could start school pretty much any time after July 1, which is helpful. So the 4th version of all this, which I think could potentially be an even smarter option, splitting the baby down the middle, if you will, is working out a modified calendar using the new date that isn't just a cookie cutter. Let's move from here, let's copy Magnolia's schedule, let's copy Nashville's schedule, and just do it that way. Now, we could do something like that, but all that is still on the table, but we're actually having conversations about that versus just having a conversation with the school board and doing it that way. So that's kind of where we are. That's setting the framework of where we are. So why consider some of these modified options? Everybody take a look, if you can see that. These are all things that have come up in conversation, whether I've said it, a school board member has said it, a superintendent or a board member from a district that's adopted something new, the commissioner of education, teachers inside this district. These are just a combination. Now there's other comments too, and we'll get to some other considerations later. You have to meet the state required 1,068 hours for instruction. That's a given. You have to do that if you move to anything other than the 178 contact days. The conversation has been, okay, I'm not saying this is a truism, but the conversation has been less burnout for students and teachers. I've heard that come out of people's mouths, okay? More teaching and learning because you are starting school in the traditional quote-unquote summertime. More vacations during the year. That's literally been, I didn't say it, that's been said. We can take a vacation and pick a month, October, September, versus having to do them just in those summer times. You still do get a summer in the quote-unquote year-round calendar. It's just an abbreviated 5-6 weeks. Better attendance, okay? Teacher attendance and student attendance. People who've gone on this have said, the reason we did it is for improved attendance, okay? Not all the research and data is back on that, but that's been said. Help recruit and retain teachers. Testing schedules will allow for adequate administration. so there would be fewer breaks in April and May. Everybody that I've talked to in district and even out of district has said, everybody kind of understands, all hands on deck in those last 2 months. Nobody's talking about days out and all that. Maybe not going to school during spring break, obviously, which is in March. Probably not on Easter, but every other day we're expecting to be in school. Shorter summer break should lead to less learning loss. Everybody knows the summer slide is a real thing, especially in households and in communities where access to books and maybe tutorial programs in the summer are not rampant. Campus offices would be open 8 to 4, Monday through Friday for non-holiday breaks. All extended contract employees report to work as usual. We talked about this at length. We can talk about it more today if you want to, but I think everybody's starting to understand if you work an extended contract, you still work those days. We can get creative on some of that Monday through Friday during those weeks for extended contract folks to where we can work a summer schedule or something like that. So there could be some time like on Fridays. But the basic idea would be you're doing a job, you have more days in your contract, you still have to work those days. An added benefit that I've discovered recently is some districts are going to like principals meetings and other extended instructional meetings or administrative meetings during those times, which can be helpful. That way the principal or facilitator or whoever isn't pulled out of the building or out of their office or their workflow to do that. So these are things I've heard. And David is going to record, he is recording all this. I want more comments and thoughts as we go forward, so get those in your mind. So the current calendar that we have now, obviously it's not a copy and paste, but it kind of feels, or would feel, kind of like our calendar feels now. So we picked and chose some opportunities where we could have 3-day weeks or 3-day breaks, or weekends, 4-day weekends here and there. There may be a day that we're out, and then the following Monday or vice versa Friday could be a professional learning day. Not a day where students are there for contact time, but a time where teachers could be learning without kids in the building, which we all know is a positive thing. Just recently, last month, I was talking to some teacher groups about this, and they said, yeah, and it's just a comment, okay? It's an anonymous comment. Yeah, but if kids are in school, we don't want to be in school either. Well, you have to work a certain amount of days versus the amount of time those students are in session. Professional development, planning, all those things are required, and we have to follow up and do those things. This allows us to be a little bit more creative with that time. School ends generally that last week of May. This year, ours is going into the 2nd of June for work days, but that's generally the timeline of when school would be out with flexibility. So we could get even more creative with this, but it would kind of look more, quote unquote, traditional. The big deal is that we're using hours and not days, so that for us, that amounts to about 176 versus 178 student contact days with built-in time for AMI. So if any of you know anything about AMI, most of you are educators or educators adjacent. AMIs are those days, used to be, where you could do virtual instruction, count them as inclement weather day. Well, there's no such thing as an AMI day now, so what we have to do is essentially bank time up until a certain point. So we have, I think, baked into our schedule 4 or 5 AMI, quote unquote, inclement weather, really, days. If we go above that, which we may, but I don't always, then your contract time is not affected in terms of your last day. This should not be a shock to anyone. You're living this. You're currently living this. Return to your traditional calendar. If you've been in the district or been an educator longer than 18 months, you have lived this. So we would go back to a situation where we're 178 days, traditional breaks, not that creative on when we're out. We may pick and choose some here and there, but kids are going 178. The stalwarts who do this, there are some, larger districts especially, they say, we need as much time as we can get with kids. We'll do the 178, and our community is used to the ones. It's really about community, to be honest. Our community is used to the 178, but we're going to do the 178. And an adjustment to hours and an adjustment to modify, they're just not ready to go down that route yet. I think we're nimble enough, we're proven to be, that we can maneuver a little quicker. But that's just, there's some stalwarts out there that don't want to change. Not that that's a bad thing, but that's their philosophy. Okay, the modified extended calendar. So this is what we proposed as one of the options last year. The date specifically very well may change, right? But school year would start around the 25th of July, last week of July, something like that. The school year ends around the end of the first week of June, maybe a little bit later, depending on when that start date is. Bullet point 3 is really the thing that gets everybody excited when they start talking about it and creating reasons of rationale. It's the extended breaks throughout the school year, approximately every 4 to 6 weeks up until that testing time. So for example, the week of Labor Day or that Labor Day week, that for example could be one. The first week of October could be one. You get Thanksgiving week already, 2 weeks in December, that would change. A week in February, March, spring break, and then April and May pretty sparse. There are people who are real advocates for this. They want to do this because of those breaks. And I think sometimes what gets lost, and I get that it's part of it, about teachers having breaks and some of those things. They say students get breaks, that's also a positive thing. But they don't talk as much about the start time. Now, a traditional, or real, I should say, year-round calendar, you would not have 5 or 6 weeks in the summer. You just wouldn't. You might have 3, or 2, or 4, maybe. It's not truly a year-round calendar. We say year-round, and that's depending on who you're talking to, that could be a viscerally positive thing or a viscerally negative thing. So I think the best thing to do going forward, and I'll try to do it myself, I'll just label it that way like everybody else has, taking that out of our vocabulary. But it's this modified extended calendar that looks something like this. Again, one of the benefits was administrative meetings. One of the big challenges that I can foresee, this is a real challenge for us in particular, will be collaboration with our local community college. Not to say that we won't figure it out, because we certainly will, because we care about kids and we're adults, but it will be something to figure out because we have a great partnership, more so than literally everyone else that I've talked to who does this. And we want to keep it that way. So the Collegiate Academy, the Secondary Career Center, kids getting a year of college or close to a year of college or a semester of college, technical certificates, we're building on those programs. They don't operate on this kind of calendar. They operate on a more traditional / modified calendar. We will just have to literally figure that out. So Hot Springs, I'll give you an example. I think their superintendent's pretty smart. I like her a lot. Their team is good. And she said, yeah, we didn't really consider that as much. We didn't have a huge partnership. We have a good partnership with National Park College, but definitely not, and this is her words, not what y'all are doing. So we're going to have to figure that out. They did some virtual instruction for some kids who still had to have some report time and some other things. That they admitted they didn't love that. They thought maybe it could have been structured better. So they're working even with the college, maybe even changing their start and end times. I don't know how that's going to go, but I know it's on the table. We have not gone that deeply into conversations. I'm having a conversation with Dr. Holt next week, and this is one of the topics that's on the agenda, just so everybody can be clear on it. But for us, and this is a Hope-specific thing, we literally would have to figure that out because we are different than some of the others that have gone down this pathway. Not to say we can't figure it out, I'm just saying it's a real fact. Additional considerations. These are just, kind of a laundry list, I guess, trying to read your mind a little bit. The UAHT collaboration, I've had some members of the Board of Visitors for UHT call me and say, tell me about this a little more. So, I know there's not 300 people in here, but as soon as that decision gets made on the school board meeting, I guarantee I'll get 300 phone calls. Like, I know how that works. Specialized tutoring after school structure, I would still, this is an I statement, I would still want to run after school / break time, interventions, extended time, where it's not just general child care, but providing some almost like after school structure or really like summer school structure during those times. Right now, we can pay for that out of magnet funds. Long term, I believe we can sustain that with Title I funds, but that would be an additional expense that we would take on, but I would want to take that on. Now, I've talked to some of these districts, and some of them have literally said, we didn't want to do that. And the rationale was twofold. One was, if we're out, we're just going to be out. And the other was, I didn't think anybody would sign up. So I think I want to go a little deeper of a dive than that to say, there are kids and parents in our community that would highly benefit from this, for real, especially from the ages of 4 to, 12, 14, 13, that we could provide some additional assistance and also make it very, educational, tier 2, tier 3 type interventions with some extension opportunities. Curricular, extracurricular, training and hours, this is like band, football, all those things. I know that becomes a part of the conversation in any small town in Arkansas. We would still train during those times. We would still have practice during those times. You can't just take a week off of practice in the middle of season. There will still probably be football games during those weeks. They're doing it, folks are doing it now. So that shouldn't be too foreign to people if we went to that structure. Extended contract employees, we put that earlier, that would still work. Data from other schools in terms of student data is very mixed. Still trying to connect with Marion a little bit on some of their data. The Osceola data does not bear out positively. There's a lot of factors with Osceola, I think, that aren't just calendar-based. There's not really any data to come back right now from the surrounding ones that we've had. That's kind of an in-process conversation. Early reports from surrounding districts, I have reached out and talked with folks about that. The administrative structure has been a positive thing, as I mentioned. Meetings, trainings for those extended contract employees viewed as a positive. Timeline for the decision. I was telling David earlier, kind of tongue-in-cheek, but I'm being serious. I would love it if we had our calendar conversations, our next year staffing conversations. We have a middle school reconfiguration that we're going through, all that decision-making process there, where folks are going in terms of their actual, even down to the room that they're going to be teaching in, all those things. PD schedule, you name it, done, completed by February, right? So I think we would do better if we start making those decisions earlier on. It's a more stable environment. It feels better for our employees. It feels better for our parents. Where we just know, and there's many months to go before the school year ends. There's time. I think we're there. We can make those decisions. We have the data to do that. And then the middle school reconfiguration and the impact on that. We know these things are coming, so I don't really anticipate it being an actual impact in terms of not being able to do it in a feasible way. It just means we have to be intentional with our time. That's it. So when we do the first part of that, the planning piece and where folks are going and all that, the move can physically be made in a matter of a week or two, and then it's just a matter of making sure everybody gets where they need to go. That means you could definitely start school in July, at the end of July, the middle of July. I don't see a lot of people sign up for that, but maybe even in the middle of July. All right, so if you've heard me talk about this or been in meetings with me multiple times, there's probably not a whole lot new about what I've said, to be honest. There might be a few things here and there, some new reports, but I want to give everybody a chance to have some feedback and some input here. David is recording this, so I'd like to be able to pass the microphone to you so you can ask your questions, but I want you to digest that and then ask any questions that you may have or provide any comments that you may have on this. I guess my final remarks that I'll make before I pass the mic, it doesn't have to be this, that, or that, okay? There is a pathway where it could be a modified, right? Where it's not what we're doing now, but we get even more strategic with when those times are. Now, it might not look like this, where you have 1, 2, 3 additional months in the school year where you're out a full week, but it might look like 3 additional months where you're out 2 or 3 additional days, right? And some people like that. 240 employees don't really care that much because we're going to be here anyway. But from a teaching aspect or perspective, I'm sensitive to that. Some folks like that idea even better than having a full week out during those times. So, The floor is literally yours, and I'll do my best to respond to any questions that you may have. Thoughts, questions, considerations? I know Clinton Elementary is a voting block, so if the voting block for Clinton Primary would like to provide any comments, you definitely can too. This is what this is. This is an open, intentionally an open meeting. So if you have any questions or comments, let me know. Yes, ma'am.
I know this was intended to be for the entire community, all the stakeholders here in the school district. So I'm noting, came in late and I'm sorry about that, but I was surprised at how few people I see here tonight. So is there another way that we can be able to gather data or input from the majority of the stakeholders?
That's a great question.
So yes, so we are also, as soon as this is over, it'll probably be tomorrow, worst case scenario the next day, send out another survey to everyone. David and I will have to get pretty kind of strategic in how we work it so it's clear, but we want to be clear with the feedback, gather some feedback on what this is. We're going to do it in conjunction with releasing this video and editing it down to where it makes good sense. If you wanted to watch a 15-minute clip or something, you can, and then give your feedback. This is, and you missed this part, this is the probably third or fourth conversation I've had about this. This is the first that we've kind of opened it up to everybody. There will be more like this. The closer we get to people perceiving that a decision is being made, this is my experience from last year, I'm sure there will be more and more discussion about that and more active. So if folks thought, to put it out there, if folks thought we were making this decision this month for the board meeting, this would be in a packed house. The one issue I would say that is conflicting here is that the election is tomorrow. So some people's attentions might literally be on the election. Yes, sir.
And I feel I can probably talk to that microphone. I thought I could too, but maybe it's wrong. We talked previously at some board meetings when this all first came up about if we do go to the extra 3 weeks off. I know there's a lot that comes into play with businesses, and mainly our 3 big businesses where there's a lot of shift work going on. For those parents who have younger kids, mainly from primary school age kids, those extra weeks, would the school district be able to provide a normal day, almost, as some babysitting for, because a junior high school kid, they're fine being home by themselves the next 2 weeks, but first grade, second grade may not be able to.
So yeah, that's a great question. And that was one of the responses earlier. I would want to keep it open. We've talked about it in a summer schedule, so like an 8:30 to 1 or 2 kind of schedule. If we needed to extend that out just for those 3 additional weeks, obviously we would do that. I think it would be responsible for us to do that in a transition to keep our school doors open during those times. We would also have to staff it and plan for it and all those things. But we can pay for it with magnet money right now. There's line items for after school and tutoring. We can do that. Longer term, I believe we can pay for it with Title I funds. However, we have declining Title I funds because we have slightly declining enrollment. And so those funds are wrapped up in, actually, a great number of those funds are wrapped up in salaries for folks who are doing instructional support. But yes, all the answer to that in a short answer is yes, we can do that. Other questions? Things that are top of mind for you? Statements that you would like to make? Nothing is off the table here as long as you are respectful.
One more thing, Dr. Crosby.
I guess it's most of our staff is here. What is the consensus on most of all of our employees? And they touched on what they would rather kind of see. I don't really get much from parents and stuff that's out here. What about staff?
Yes, we have staff members here. There was a survey that was put out last year that just the way it was positioned was interesting. But the majority of employees, like 56% or something like that, voted for a version of the modified year-round, okay? So there was some conversation when we didn't go to that modified year-round of, Crossley, the school board didn't do what the teachers wanted to do. Like, That was part of the conversation, but we also didn't have a conversation with anybody's mama about this decision, or businesses or things like that. So, that was a pretty decent discussion last year. I think it was about 56% at that time voted to go to a modified year-round. Any other questions or comments?
Okay, my question is, what does the business
You got to, for the good of everybody.
Okay, so my question is like, what does the businesses, how does that affect the calendar, basically? I don't understand that.
So how does the calendar affect the businesses, or the businesses affect the calendar? Either one? Yeah, so we have not talked extensively with all of the business partners that we have. The biggest business partner that we have really is the college. So that out of this meeting and conversation, I think one of the next things would be specifically a business-focused response. Looking from some other businesses, like employers in those other counties and school district areas, there's been minimal impact. I mean, there's just other times where folks are out. And I know it's different times, so there's a paradigm shift that has to take place for parents and teachers and principals and everybody, but the actual functional impact of the day-to-day has been pretty minimal in those places, from what I can gather. And again, I've talked to all of the surrounding districts about that. From one of the questions I asked, very minimal interruption for that. But they would need to be aware of it, because the times will be different for those employees.
I guess the concern for me going into June, and I know we're almost to June now, our calendar, is, as a former principal, I would rather school be out the week after testing. I know there's some schools do a great job of review, prep for next year, but if we got the summer slide, I don't know how much that is helpful. So, my concern is adding days after statewide testing. Is that an effective use of teacher and student time?
So I actually think that's a really good consideration. So when we're talking about it, the issue would be, do we consider EOC to be EOY? That, to me, that's the question.
Well, that's what they used to call it.
Right. But like, is EOC, which is what we have now, the end of course assessment, functionally the end of the year? I don't think the answer has to be yes or no, but the statement that you made with your calendar tells you what you think, right? So if you go into the middle of June, the answer is no. You still have a month of school left, so it's not the end of the year, right? If you were to try to end it closer to the end of May or next to last week of May or something like that, there are ramifications on the calendar the other way. So a functional way to look at that, and I may get booed off stage, but the functional way to look at that would be, okay, let's start school in the third week, middle of July, maybe even the last week of July. Limit those week breaks, where they're not week breaks, where they're 2 days here, 3 days here, and then school ends 2 weeks after EOC. But that's not the attractive thing right now, which everybody knows in education, things are cyclical. That's not the attractive thing now, to have a full week off here, a full week off here, a full week off there, in addition to the week at Thanksgiving, which not everybody gets, and 2 weeks at Christmas and spring break, right? So we could, that's kind of the fourth option I was talking about, that, and I have not crafted that up yet, but I think that's coming. Like, if people think that would be a nice addition, can I just get a kind of a thumbs up or hand signal of something you think? Let's end school pretty much soon after the end of course. Okay, the hand raised up or down?
Because they're done.
Thumb sideways if you don't know, thumbs down if I'm crazy.
Well, I always thought that the best use of time was to have all that time front loaded. Where, you know, if we're gonna be evaluated on test scores, let's have all our time before the test, not after the test. And the other thing is, say we started, what, August 12th? Is it about there? Okay. You take it to the middle of July, that's still 4 weeks, you still get your weeks off. Because you're not ending any early. I mean, if we did 5 days earlier, that'd have been better than we did this year. But the value of those days, to me, just my personal opinion, goes down dramatically after the end of course test.
As someone who taught a tested subject, a principal, and obviously tested grades, and the superintendent, I really don't disagree with that. But that means a huge paradigm shift for all those stakeholders that we were talking about. And the thing that I know districts do this. I'm not the superintendent everywhere. This is just my value statement. We make decisions here for what's best for kids, period. And I know supporting the teacher in the classroom, the parent in the school, 100% is one of those actions that's going to highly leverage and benefit the student in the class. The most impactful person in a kid's life that year, I would love to say as a superintendent, it ain't. It's the teacher right there teaching math. I know that, okay? And that's a paradigm shift to start school when some folks are going to Disney World.
You go cheaper than
Or May, right? If we did that, then your summer vacation would start in like before Memorial Day. So if I put something out there, can I just get a verbal? If I put something out like that, would you consider it seriously?
Yes.
Heads going back and forth.
Yes.
That's fine too. At least it's a conversation piece. And I love our staff members who really led the charge on getting those surveys out. But here, this is a me statement. I got a little over my skis on that last year. The surveys were out, the models were out there, and we didn't mutually vet them 100%. And there were some versions of those that I really couldn't co-sign and take to the board that folks already started voting on. And so I'm like, well, dang. that's not the best position to be in. So that's why we're starting so early.
What y'all were just talking about, give me an approximate start time.
Approximate, real bad approximate. A bad approximate start time would be July 15th and ending May graduation. Graduation could be the last day for everybody. Because if you've been a high school principal or in high school, like, come on guys, like the last 2 weeks of school, what is that? In elementary school, there's a little bit of a different feel, there really is, it's a different vibe. Because kids are wanting to come, parents are wanting kids to come even that much more than maybe they do when they're 16. I've not created that or had someone assist to create that, so that's very rough as a guest. Want to know all the issues that we're voting on, and I think we'll get more participation because we'll say the vote for this is going to be at this school board meeting. That you need to show up and talk about this. Because here was the downside, and all the superintendents that I talked to who went through this, they said the same thing. None of them said it was knee-jerk, because they wouldn't say that about their own decision, but, you know, it was quick. And because it was quick, to answer your question.
But, and I know we played around and looked at the surveys and we talked about it, and the question that, you know, as we proceed and hopefully these meetings get larger along the way and more thoughts and ideas come along, you know, the questions will pop up in those meetings and certainly on social media. What compels us to change at all?
That's a good question.
So the two biggest levers that we have to leverage as school district, superintendent, any administrator is time and resources. So we looked at our budget, we just had a budget review session this month with school board members about how we can look at all kinds of things going forward, including employee pay. This is the time factor. How we utilize our time in a smart fashion impacts you in more ways than you know, but you know it when you're in the middle of it. When you're taking or not taking breaks when you wish you should have, or kids are burnt out at times you wish they weren't, or whatever, you feel it. Anecdotally, let me tell you something. I was a turnaround principal at a school in Little Rock years ago, and one of the things that we implemented as an innovation, the district did before they even hired me, and we did it for the first year, was an extended school day. So we went to school from about 7:45 in the morning till I think the last bell rang at 4:05 or 4:10, I think, something like that. We're talking kindergarten through 5th grade. That sounds fine, like more time sounds fine in that way. My kids were done at 2:30, 2:45, 3 o'clock. So we had an additional hour and 15, hour and a half every single day. I mean, we utilized, I heard somebody say recess, we utilized recess time, we utilized instructional time. We had kids that were behind that had to grow in reading levels too, just like we do. And we're doing a jam-up job closing those gaps. You know, I see a lot of Clinton primary folks here. We are doing a great job of closing those gaps in literacy. I commend you for that, but we still have a long way to go, right? And we know that. So how we utilize that time matters. So the change would be to be smart with our time, just like we are with our finances. And because this is something that we actually consider, our other districts are considering, and there's this conversation about summer slide, which is real. There's a conversation about staff retention, which is real. I think it's responsible for us to talk about it in a well-rounded way.
All right, leads me to another question.
Okay?
Year-round school has been talked about and practiced by other districts, I suppose. Is there a glint in the Department of Ed's eye or possibly the legislature's eye to mandate year-round school within a short or midterm time frame?
Also good question. There are no such conversations about mandating a schedule. There is a conversation presently about 4-day school weeks. So there was some research that came out here recently about 4-day school weeks and about its impact on student achievement, not in necessarily a positive way. And I know there's school districts that do it. I get it, okay? But the Commissioner of Ed and some others are talking about, well, if we have schools that have kids, all of which cannot read on grade level, and we're going 4 and not 5 days a week, and we're limiting time of instruction, what are we doing? Is this about kids? And this is their conversation. Is this about kids or is this about adults? And et cetera, et cetera. So I think there is some growing conversation about letter grades and if the department or the legislature will allow 4-day weeks for schools with certain letter grades. That's all I've heard. That's very transparent. That's the only thing I've heard about that. The big decision last year was to move the start date from having to have a waiver to start before a certain time to you can start after July 1. That was the big deal. Good deal.
Okay, so when the time comes to actually vote, are we doing like a district decision and a community decision, or is it just gonna be all one decision?
So that's a really good question too. So it'll be broken down by category that you fit into. So then you'll have like the data pie table or whatever where you would see how everybody is feeling and voting. So you would have a pie chart, so to speak, or a bar graph that would say community members that predominantly identified as a community member or a parent or a teacher or whatever voted for this. You could even get more granular and say at this campus. So a parent of kids at Clinton Primary, this voting block predominantly voted for this type of candidate. And then we'll have all that data at our disposal. At the end of the day, I want to put this out there, this elephant in the room, that you all know. At the end of the day, superintendent, personnel policy committees, and the school board have to make a decision. right? There's a lot of conversations that go on behind closed doors, not that they have to be secretive, it's because it's not happening out in the open. I mean, it's a conversation that I may be having for months with the PPC, and then maybe having for months with the school board. And so we're trying to have that same transparent process with more and more people, because a decision has to be made too. So it won't be a decision where one more person voted for this particular calendar in the whole survey, so then that is what we will do as the calendar, right? It'll be about all these things. Now, that being said, we're not gonna put something, here was the issue last year. We're not gonna put anything forward, right, that we can't live with. That's gonna be the huge difference. There were versions that we voted on last year, like I said, that we've got kind of out over our skis on, where there are about two of those options that I really don't think we should have considered at all. And they were already getting votes by the time I looked up. And so that was our fault. We can do better than that. So this year we are going to do better than that.
So a lot of the things that you outlined in terms of considerations, kind of, those are some of the same things that I had, thought about, when we had our staffing discussion. But in terms of how the calendar is outlined, if we have those breaks, one of the things that we need to consider is, the testing and our testing schedule, and how much instruction time we have before interims, before summits and that kind of thing. And then with us having an entire week with admin staff, that gives us more time for a deeper dive to look at that data with us trying to be a data-driven, district.
So I think that is an actual highly positive thing, right? There's big time pros and cons with all of it, but what she was just referencing is, for example, right? It's November now, so we'll just October the 7th through the 13th, or whatever that was. If we would have already had our Q1 quarterly assessment completed and an interim completed and the previous year's summative data right there, we could have been having, because right now I'm pulling building admin 2 hours here, an hour and a half here, to have these discussions with them and their leadership teams. We could have some uninterrupted time during the day to go as deep as we want to go, down to the individual kid. So in Clinton Primary, for example, y'all were a little bit ahead of the curve on some of that individual data. We were going through that, but we also had kids in the building those days. So your facilitators were assisting, but they also could be assisting you in doing modeling lessons and those sorts of things. So again, we have the two biggest levers we have from an administrative position is time and money, okay? And we just have to use our time as smart as we can. Other questions, comments are fine too, okay? Comments, questions?
Well, just listening to the conversation, I think doing what's best for Hope Public Schools and Hope's children is what we need to look at, because what Mr. Hopeland said, ending after end of the year testing and graduation makes a whole lot of sense, because the kids are done, everybody's done, we get nothing else done after that. Having time off after the quarterly assessments for y'all to review makes a lot of sense for us. And in Mr. Powers' comment, why are we changing anything? I've been in it a while. It's not the same. And what worked 20 years ago is not working today at all.
That's not my feeling.
No, I understand. That's what people ask. Yeah, that's what people ask. They do. But from a teacher in a classroom, it's not working the way it used to. And so then we need to look at what changes can be made and what's best for us here right now.
I think that's very well said.
Let me say, About as well put
Yeah.
as it could be. And what I think is very important, Dr. Crossley, is we get asked these questions, or we have these meetings, or we have the vote at the school board, whatever, that we can be as concise and know why and what we're doing to explain it, because I think anyone that's ever had a kid in school 15 years ago and might have a grandkid in school now, and certainly if you go back 52 years when I was there, things change. Things change, and we, as a board, as administrators, as teachers, as everyone that's going to commit to making this change, we just have to know our material. We gotta be able to block up that track play and do it well every single time, just like the old wind coach used to do. I know you at home and Jimmy all know what I'm talking about, but that's what we have to be able to do. And so I liked her comment, and I thought it was put together very well.
Yeah, because I think what has missed from this conversation that is becoming more and more clear to me, in a good way, what I'm about to say is a positive thing. It's not exceptionalism, it's a positive comment. We are different than some of the districts around us. Not that we don't have similarities, we certainly do. But we are out far in front on certain things that we want to keep going and doing well. We are getting statewide recognition. And besides getting recognition, kids are having a tangible benefit. Parents are having a tangible benefit by more and more kids getting certificates of proficiency, and now hopefully leading to technical certificates where they can get employed with a high-wage job as soon as they graduate college or high school with a 2-year college degree, cutting down on how much that costs to get a 4-year degree, because the average college debt, I just saw the number, went up from 22 when I started this job to 28. This is my 4th year here. So that's $6,000 in 4 years. That's probably going to keep going. So the average student debt, by the time I leave in 40 years, is going to be 2 mortgages. But we won't have that reality here in Hope, right? And a plethora of other things too. But the way we've had the conversation has kind of been the way everybody else has had it, and it just never felt right. Because we do some other things that other school districts don't. I called a school district 3 weeks ago, or whenever we just had our conversation, and talked about this dynamic and difference with the local college that they have, because they have one. And this is no shade on them, but they were just like, oh, never thought about that. I'm going, we can't do that. We can't not think about it. Like, our impact here in the community with the 2-year college is just too great. So what else? Questions, comments, concerns, any of it is on the table. We have 12 minutes, and we're going to be timely to be out of here before then.
Just one thing to think about, the weeks that they're out on that schedule there with the college, it's not out at the same time. So what are the transportation issues with the kids that are doing the return?
Right, so we kind of alluded to it. I know I was talking a lot, so I apologize. That's a consideration we have to have. So, for example, Hot Springs is actually going to have a conversation with National Park and see if they can just have the same schedule. And I don't know if that's going to work or not. I don't think it's going to work. But if that's one consideration. The other piece is some folks aren't busing kids to those concurrent classes. So that they're having like some virtual option that's very hit or miss. Like, we know our clientele. We like it that way. We want to provide the supports and services. And so when you know better, you do better. So maybe this is a good version. Maybe it's something that's even a little bit more modified from this, where teachers and students still get a break, where they can go, because I heard somebody before we started, now you make sure you tell everybody that's when everybody should be taking their doctor's visits. I said, yes ma'am, I will do that. That is when people should be taking their doctor's visits, if they can plan it. Other comments, questions, concerns?
So I have three things, let's hope I can remember them. Number one, right after we had that meeting virtually a couple weeks ago, I ran into a couple people I know that are administrators at other schools that are doing this. And we sat down and I said, just tell me what you think about it. Everybody I talked to loved it. Now, they said from the administrator's perspective, because as a principal, assistant principal, you have that time built in that you can do all the paperwork that needs to be done, and that way you can focus on your kids when the kids are there. The people that I talked to, childcare wise, they said they did not offer anything when they were out of school. But they said they had checked with all of the daycares, and that the daycares had said that they would be glad to take the students as drop-ins. The con to that is usually there's a higher price, and you're having to pay.
That's right.
The other question that I thought of as I was listening was transportation, utilities. If we're gonna be having our buildings open and using our buses more, I know the biggest costs, the biggest expenditures that we have are actually salaries and benefits. But I don't know how that cost of keeping all the buildings open year-round just about,
Yep.
and transporting students, how that would impact.
So, yeah.
So it's just a shift, right? So it's a shift in time. Kids are still going the 1,068 hours, it's just shifting it to when they're doing so. So there's a little bit of an added expense for the transportation that we would run for the summer school type schedule during the school year. The salary and benefits pieces would be in the categorical fund. So that would be nothing out of district operating, that we'd be paying additional, all that would come out of categorical. If we had to pay for all of that out of district operating, that would be an expense that we probably could not incur long term. And to be fair, we don't know how many parents would take us up on it. Like the market, this is an economic language, but the market tends to correct itself when new realities present themselves. So I don't like the idea of saying, my stance on this is not what I'm about to say, but I'm not comfortable saying, well, daycares will figure it out, parents will figure it out, because daycares are free. We're a public free school, and I want to keep it that way. Right? We have 89% of our student population on free and reduced lunch. So we're going to say, just go find a daycare, or we're going to have 8-year-olds keeping 4-year-olds at home. Like, we all live in the real world, and you know better, you do better. All good thoughts, all good questions?
So the final consideration is, and I have a brother that is a single father, and we don't think about our fathers in their, the dual custody and when they have visitation and that kind of thing. So that's something else that we need to consider in terms of our stakeholders.
Yeah. And so on the back end of that conversation we had, if you remember, if you were on that call, that took up more time than I thought it was going to take up, which was about visitation and custody and all those things. But I did mention that to some of the school districts that I talked to, and it was kind of the same thing. The time shifts, so then how you work out visitation and all those things also shifts because you have a new set of facts, and that has worked itself out just like some of the daycare conversations have worked themselves out.
My concern is, I like the modified syndicate. My concern is our kids in poverty. How we take care of kids who are homeless and have a need of food. How will that be supplied for them?
I mean, we're spot on, like you and I, like that's why we would still run a summer school schedule and provide 2.5 meals a day. So the 2.5 meals would be breakfast, lunch, and a snack. I don't think Dina is going to get mad at me for saying that. We did talk about that. I think that's an actual reality. Any other questions, concerns, or thoughts? Anybody else? Wind it down if anybody doesn't have anything. Cut the mic, I got it. All right, so here's my next step, so you know, and you can hold me, this is as much accountability for me as it is for anything else. So by the end of the week, we're gonna finalize and send out a survey. Here's my worry, and let's talk this thing through, you can help me, okay? We don't have a defined, modified, that would do all the things that we just mentioned, which was start school earlier and end school earlier. That's not the year-round calendar, it's just those 3 additional weeks. So nobody's gonna be able to vote on or have a context for that if they're just cold reading it on the survey. So we might could develop something, if you're okay with it, what I might do is work and function through the PPC with this, kind of get those different versions out there. They're already, believe it or not, they're already working on it. I've seen 2 versions of the calendar already. And have them look at it, and then whenever we get to a good place, then send that out. So, I get a thumbs up, thumbs down, or thumbs sideways, thumbs up is fine, thumbs down is that's a bad idea, thumbs sideways is like, whatever.
So if it actually counted
No, that's what I'm saying, this is what I'm saying. It would be like an example they can look at, right? Because here's the thing, the last version we just talked about, if people are clicking through a survey, they would have no idea what they think about that. Unless they read 3 paragraphs about it and then looked at and some people will do that, but we want to give folks as much intel as we can before we get to that vote piece. So I could just send, literally, we could give a report to the public on this, that could be the next step, and synthesize it down. We could have somebody, I could do a 2-minute video or whatever, or somebody else could, highlighting these things, and then let everybody simmer on it, and then send the survey out. If you're agnostic to the method, we'll just work on that and bake in all this so that we get the actual feedback we want. Because here's what I don't want. This whole thing would be a waste of time to me if we go through this whole process and don't feel like we got anybody invested in the decision that's outside of our 314 employees. All right, going once, going twice. I love y'all. Thank y'all for coming out. David, thank you for videoing this, and we'll get some more information out to you shortly.